I am writing to express my disappointment that the United Nations decided not to hold a symposium on the crisis in China concerning the Uyghurs, which is often evaluated in the context of Tibet. And my reason for being disappointed is that such a symposium on the part of the United Nations would have provided considerable insight as a source for a wide range of diverse opinions and presentation of evidence and branches for other sources. Because the issue of the Uyghurs tends to be in the media coupled with proclamations that cannot be trusted, whether they come from the East or the West. Sound bites generally do not help in a complicated situation. What comes through loud and clear is hypocrisy. This hypocrisy can be both East and West. For example, many reviewers of the crisis of ethnic tension in China admit that for the most part, the situation is peaceful and people are oppressed only by ethnic disfavor. And for the most part, people are getting along. And it attributes this to government management and sometimes dour terms like thought management. The West has its own thought management problems in announcing detention as a form, for example, of genocide. This gets linked up in the hearts and minds of people who know nothing about it, and they have visions of widespread massacres that do not actually take place. So the shadow of cover up haunts the UN's decision completely senselessly. People can do their own research. The United Nations did not forbid research into the subject, it just rejected a symposium. Now, when we say hypocrisy, you'll notice that I started with Eastern hypocrisy because loudest and clearest is Western hypocrisy. And I want to turn briefly to the Western hypocritical aspect of the human rights stand. When COVID-19 closed my college, I realized that we have a very serious human rights problem in the world that expresses itself in the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest of America, as a civil rights problem. And administrative priorities play a large role in this. Clearly, pointing the fingers at faraway places is a form of deflection. This doesn't mean that the issue isn't important. The question is whether or not the ripple effect of abolishing our own local priorities is actually going to help a situation that is far away. In other words, if we abolish civil rights issues in Seattle, will it actually encourage the human rights situation of the Rohingya in Burma, the Uyghurs in China? Or is it just a way of deflecting from what's happening here? So there are um, difficult problems to study when it comes to human rights that have not been foreclosed by the human rights condition in the United Nations priorities concerning their symposiums. And I would like to describe the human rights situation in Seattle, as well as object to foreclosure by the UN on discussion of the Uyghur issue in their Congress of Parties, on the grounds that it would have been a good source for a diverse number of opinions and would have helped the sensibilities of the public attenuate to management of ethnic tensions that don't actually cross the line into genocide, to be wary of Western hypocrisy as well as questioning Eastern methods and practices. For my own situation as a elderly, collegiate oriented library clerk, I know that administration's priorities all through the 80s and 90s were sexualized. Now, if you look at the situation in human rights communities that are struggling with ethnic tensions, such as Uyghur and the areas in Africa that still have to deal with colonial racism, you find that an old tactic of militarizing the turf to increase friction by what are known as rough patches to the military psychiatric community in Seattle is an old practice of the Central Intelligence Agency. The Central Intelligence Agency has created a mirror for such things as incitement of Zulus against the African National Congress and the behavior of Trumpy-tuned mutinees who targeted me. Many of them include Black Panther community groups who have used their historic disfavor to make creepy inroads in things like disfavoring and policing and abusing uh, medical access because of an Aztec idea about the white man. And they build this as targeting a counter stereotype of favor for the white man. I don't know why anybody wouldn't see that I'm deaf, neurologically traumatized, and have been tortured as a factor in my minority status. I don't know why, but I do know that what they're selling as a race feud is a lie. It's not what's going on. They've identified stereotypes on each side, and the brainstormers are Asian. And they tap off a white, they tap off a black, and they go back and forth like a pendulum. And it's the gulagging of American society by Yoko Ono. Human rights in the 60s meant that John Lennon got to use cocaine. And she misses the days when the Mad Hatters were all about human rights to sell their songs. And she's gulagging situations in the United States by playing a game of yo-yimbo. Double murders masquerading as race feuds. And she's getting a lot of help from the Trumpy-tuned mutinies and the Black Panthers. Now, one of the things that I noticed was that there's pictures of Diamanda Galus outside the World Trade Center before the anthrax attack. She presumably represents AIDS victims, but she was in demonic services and immunogenetics in the 70s. So she was masquerading sarcasm about sexual liberation. This masquerade of sarcasm was intended to create a backlash. Yusu Andour is an extreme right-wing Muslim working with Hollywood. Andour and Hollywood attacked me as an Aztec human sacrifice. One of the things that they did back in World War I was set up facilitation of the New Testament's book of Revelation, which is what we're getting with the fossil fuel industry. And it was heavily sexualized in the War College Index. Lou Brecker, the people who was one of the people who was involved in the Aztec sacrificial script from right-wing Israel, written by Gail Burston with the help of Her Majesty's government. And Robert Fripp has a picture of her on God Save the Queen, one of her lookalikes on God Save the Queen. So we know they're policing my immediate environment by killing Kennedys and so forth. That's their contribution to um, the thought management program. Now, when it comes to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, Putin doesn't think that Russia is at risk. Russia was doing fine under the prior arrangements. They had a lot of investments. What's the problem is the oligarchs have something else in mind. The oligarchs are leapfrog, and they spend human beings as, just knights of resignation, send them out to shoot each other, get rid of them. Now, the ego politics of the celebrity superstate put big egos in charge and command, and they're ever watchful that thought deviates from thought management. And UW Dialectical is facilitating the terrorism of both Trump and Putin in this respect. And what they did with me was they built twin psychology board with the help of Patricia Fripp. Patricia Fripp was the Mad Hatter who basically said this is not a drill. After working the entire program of Lou Brecker, she then comes in, this is not a drill. After working the whole Endor's Hollywood phantasm, she comes in, this is not a drill. And that's just a euphemism for saying Mick Jagger's getting too old to get it up anymore. Sorry, girls, it's not a drill anymore, is her message. And what they did was they created a program of screen evaluation. I love Greta Thunberg, but anybody in their right mind would realize I wouldn't be able to get involved with her romantically, except as a poet. She's my Beatrice, so to speak. I love the Pope Francis idea of her as my Beatrice. That's wonderful. I love Greta and I love the Pope. And I don't have anything personal against any of these people. They're just choosing me, as Steve Langer said, because no one else fills the bill. I'm sorry that it had to be you, he told me, but I'm not sorry that we're doing it. Okay, so, and he's from Princeton, where Cornell West was. They get themselves all worked up with harness. And Robert Fripp comes speaking with his Putin show, and Oliver Stone says, I will sanctify. They grab me by the bolts of the neck. Oh, because I'm Frankenstein, because I look at beautiful girls in TikTok too, so I'm the duplicitous liberal humanist, the duplicitous human, and the parochial buzzsaw is going to come and hack. So anybody in the right mind realizes under circumstances like that, I can't. I mean, they have the death squad from Cornell West with biological linkage of licky chops therapy. We're going to inject you, and this comes from the sadistic freak show of Yoko Ono's Japan, Tokyo Shock Cinema. So Andor and Hollywood go way back to World War One. The human rights issue is very important to an educated world. We can't just stand still while they blow up schools. People have the right to go to school and learn about these issues. And I'm sorry that the UN didn't facilitate it. But for your assurance, if you're brainwashed by Western genocide, the ethnic tensions in China with the Uyghurs and Tibet are largely civil and can be, there's hope for progress under the current situation so long as we facilitate diplomatic reform with China in the East. We're contributing to the tensions by refusing to do that. I'm sorry I can't support Nancy Pelosi's decision to draw a hard line in Taiwan, because I think diplomatic reform is something that the Chinese understand very well. And I regret that they were not enthusiastic about being forthcoming about the Uyghur situation.